Asymmetrical Haircuts Justice Update with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So I'm taking a trip down memory lane this week to Arusha, Tanzania, and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, because that's where I started getting interested in covering international criminal justice processes.
So finally, this week for this episode, I get to ask you to Janetpedia us.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I'm up to Stephopedia basics, but this is how I set up a story about the ICTR when I did it about 25 or 30 years ago. Roughly 1 million people died in 1994 in the Central African state of Rwanda. At first, it was difficult for the world to believe what was happening. A planned, controlled, deliberate decision to wipe out large numbers of the minority ethnic group, the Tutsis. And soon afterwards, the United Nations decided to set up an international criminal tribunal to prosecute those responsible for genocide.
Yeah, so that background is all things that I've heard before. But for me, the Rwanda Tribunal is a bit of an also-ran situation because I was covering its sister court in The Hague, which dealt with the former Yugoslavia. But of course, the two tribunals also did share a chief prosecutor and an appeals court. And even now they share the UN mechanism for international criminal tribunals, or UNMICT, or I think now it's called UN residual mechanism for international criminal tribunals. So it changes acronyms, but we still keep calling it the MICT.
Yeah. The ICTR, the Rwanda Tribunal, was established 30 years ago last week. And very much, even though the Rwanda genocide itself was huge, it was devastating, it was really shocking to the world, that tribunal was very much a yes and to the Yugoslav tribunal, which had already been established. And of course, it was situated in a small town in northern Tanzania, and it wasn't very accessible to most people. So it basically got a lot less attention. I went there as a journalist. I'd previously been a foreign correspondent for the BBC. I'd left the Beeb and I'd gone a bit freelance. And I was making a radio documentary for Radio Netherlands, which no longer exists in the same form. And I started that documentary with some sound from the court of one of the most consequential cases the ICTR ever heard and ever decided on.
The chamber held that crimes against humanity, already punished by the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals, and genocide, a concept defined later, are crimes which particularly shock the collective conscience. Regarding the crime of genocide in particular, the preamble of the Genocide Convention recognizes that at all periods of history, genocide has inflicted great losses on humanity and reiterates the need for international cooperation to liberate humanity from this scourge. The crime of genocide is unique because it is of its element of dolus specialis, special intent, which requires that the crime be committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such.
So, Janet, can you explain that case to us? Because it's one of the ones that our guests are going to talk about.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that our guests keep on mentioning when we ask them which is their favourite case. It's the John Paul Akiyesu case. He was the mayor of a small town in Rwanda. And as the killing started, at first he was trying to protect the Tutsis living in Taba, but then he changed and he took charge himself of the killing in his town. More than 2,000 people were killed there, including men, children, and even unborn fetuses. And Akiyesu himself became the first defendant ever to be convicted directly of genocide by an international court. And of course, many of our guests talk about that particular case because there's also the sexual crimes element in his judgment.
Yeah, the rape as a war crime is in Akiyesu first, I believe.
I think I need to interrupt you there. It's rape as genocide.
Okay, I stand correct. There you see how much of the ICTR is an also ran for me. Genocide, of course, this was the first time an international court ruled upon it because It wasn't at Nuremberg. After the Second World War, in Nuremberg, members of the Nazi government were convicted of crimes against humanity, but genocide and the Genocide Convention weren't there yet. And so as a crime, it didn't exist yet. So they weren't actually convicted of that.
Yeah, the kind of decisions that the ICTR made, I mean, there were, a lot of extraordinary ones, like Akayesu, like the head of government pleading guilty there. I mean, they made extraordinary legal history. But the judges were actually sometimes themselves a bit too busy to notice that they were, having this huge effect. Judge Navanathan Pillay was one of those who spoke to me 30 years ago.
We were very deeply involved in our work, and so engrossed in that the night before we were all helping in running out the judgment, because we have all kinds of technological problems here, and the computer was swallowing up chunks of this judgment, and judges were here working till 2 a.m, and that's when we finally signed the final judgment at 2:30. And in fact, the summary did not come out till much later, and there's even an error in the English version of the summary. So these were the conditions. I mean, this is what engrossed us fully. And that's why the reaction of the world press and all the emails, and I understand we had 13,000 visits to the tribunal's internet within hours of the delivery of the judgment. And I think that brought home to us the historical significance of the judgment. I didn't think when I was working on it that this is so important. All we had in mind, the judges, I'm sure my colleagues will agree with this, is that we have an innocent person before us, and we have to very carefully look into all the allegations and the evidence. And that was our primary concern. If we took such a serious step as to convict him and sentence him to life, we wanted to be absolutely sure that we were doing our own work properly.
So I don't know if you can imagine it, Steph. I mean, 30 years ago, Judge Pillay was the only female judge at the court. All the rest were men. I mean, it's really odd winding the clock back like this. It was another world. And of course, it was another world also for me as a journalist, because there were very different issues that people were concerned about from what we're concerned about today. Of course, some are the same, some have echoes down. So I thought, rather than doing a kind of a big, what's the significance of, the big legal bits and pieces, the admissions of guilt and what it says, what the struggles were about how to have a separate prosecutor. There's so much we could talk about. I thought, maybe we take some other focus about some of the critiques.
Yeah, because what was the critique at the time? Now we see with the ICC that it's a lot of Western justice for Africa. That's a big critique. You see a lot of it's not representative and it only targets a few people and there's so many more. Why aren't you going after X, Y, and Z? How was that at the ICTR?
Yeah, there. I mean, it was a lot of question marks about how well it was being run. Was it being managed well? I think some of that was actually racist because it was based in Africa and a lot of Africans running it. It had a lot of people to put on trial. They managed to track quite a lot of people down, so that wasn't the biggest issue. Maybe the strongest criticism at the time was coming from Rwanda, which was basically, this is taking forever. Each case is taking years, and it should be much more straightforward than this. And are you really dealing with this as seriously as you should be? But, Judge Pillay told me that she thought that wasn't a fair criticism.
Firstly, it takes a very long time to build up a tribunal. It's like building a house, you can't just move in. You first have to lay the foundation, build the house, furnish it. So it's understandable that it took 2 years for the prosecutor to investigate people, for countries to arrest these people and hand them over, and for the tribunal to build detention centers and courtrooms. So that explains the delay.
Yeah, and honestly, it was still being built. While I was there every evening, there was the sound of drilling reverberating through the tribunal. There was a third courtroom due to be opened, which was planned to speed up the process by allowing more cases to be heard. And of course, it did take time to build up the court procedure and the arguments being used by the lawyers. That was partly because there was very little in the way of precedent. James Stewart was there working for the Office of the Prosecutor, a Canadian prosecutor.
I think all of us, I'm talking now particularly about the lawyers and the prosecutors involved in these cases, are aware that we are involved in the development of something that is new, because we come from many different backgrounds, many different legal systems, and nothing works here quite the way it does at home, and of course that's how it should be. And we're very aware that we are developing new procedures, applying new rules of evidence, and developing a kind of a jurisprudence, or a case law, if you will, that is unique in the world. And that, for a lawyer, of course, is exciting stuff.
Do you have a sense that you're making it up as you go along?
To some degree, in the sense that we have very few precedents. In the system I come from, in Canada, of course, we rely on precedents. And if there's a settled practice, we know what that is. If we're going to do something radical and new, we at least have a basis upon which to build toward that new objective. But here, everything's new. You can't predict anything. And after you get used to the free fall, it becomes actually very exciting. And you can use your imagination, you can use arguments that are rooted in policy, in what should be, without worrying too much about what has been. And in that way, I think we contribute to the thinking of the judges, and I hope contribute to sound decisions on their part.
There's a voice I did recognize, because James Stewart was one of the deputy prosecutors at the ICC when it started.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something I think you have the same as I have, is we recognise people who come back again and again in different courts and tribunals. And of course, Judge Navanathan Pillay from South Africa, she has since been a judge at the ICC, briefly, but she's also been the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. But at this time when I met her, she had only basically experience as an anti-apartheid lawyer in South Africa, an activist working in the courts there. She, I don't think, was really prepared for the grueling task that she faced to be a judge in genocide trials.
I think I had some idea that I would be hearing testimony of horrific suffering, but I never realized the extent of the suffering until we heard the actual testimony. It was a new experience for me, as I said, because I had never left home before to work outside. It meant leaving the family, and a part of me said, all right, I'll try it for 2 years and then go back. Well, there you are, we're coming to almost the end of our 4 years. And I think I, including all the other people on this tribunal, do have a commitment to see this process succeed and to see this process through. And so nothing, not even the 30 years I spent taking down affidavits and interviewing people or hearing testimony of people who had been detained and tortured in South Africa, prepared me to hear the kind of testimony here, the massive scale of it. And I think a survivor giving a personal account in the courtroom is very moving. But of course, it's a different experience hearing all that as a judge. When you sit as a judge, you are not a human rights campaigner. Oh no, that you have to listen to the testimony and make sure that it links with the allegation in the charge sheet. And no matter how moved we are by the killings and the atrocities, we cannot allow our emotions to rule our judgment, which is that the accused is innocent and his guilt has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
One of the biggest issues for me looking at was that they had to get in witnesses all the time from Rwanda.
Yeah, I think we forget nowadays, with everybody filming everything on mobile phones and there being so much images and evidence, that just wasn't there in the early 1990s. There are no mobile phones recording this. There's very little video footage, and there's no social media stuff posted. So it really is about getting people to tell you what happened and getting witnesses to establish the crime base.
Yeah, of course, it was radio that was the base of one of the trials, because that was the medium that was partly used for the incitement to genocide, and some public meetings where senior officials also spoke to people. But really, witnesses were the lifeblood of the court. Rwanda, the government and the survivors community wasn't always happy about how they were cross-examined in court, because again, we had the introduction of some of the procedure from common law, where the defence counsel also had the opportunity to cross-examine, and that was tough. Plus, it was a really fraught time in Rwanda. They'd just been through a massive crisis. It was a time of fear, and the witnesses needed quite a lot of protection, because they had to go back into the communities that they came from, where very often some of the people who'd been part of the genocide were also living. So how could they come to Arusha safely, and how could they go back without their neighbours knowing what they were doing? Plus, this was one of the first times that an international tribunal was thinking about how to support particularly women giving testimony about how they had been, as individuals, raped or tortured, and what kind of trauma they've been through, and then kind of going through that trauma. So I also met up with Françoise Ndendahayo. She was a gender specialist working in the Witness Protections Unit, and she was working particularly on that practical side and on the trauma and how to support the rape victims.
They don't have to come as a package. Everybody will see them at the airport Kigali with the new clothes, like schoolgirls, getting in a UN flight for the first time. We'll guess they are coming to Arusha to testify, because everybody knows that flight is coming to Arusha. And then from Kilimanjaro airport, even the people working at the airport, they will see them. I have suggested, and I think people now are more aware. First of all, they don't have to come as a package. They have to dilute them and to put them in a commercial flight to ensure they are passing the borders with the most private way possible. Somebody else will deal with documents. And then even here in Arusha, within their safety house, to make sure they are not exposed, because in addition to the fact they have been victims of genocide, they have been humiliated, they have been, they have developed kind of susceptibility and fragility. So we have to really to do whatever we can do to make them, feel confident, self-confident again.
Records of the testimony from the witnesses who could face danger back in Rwanda are kept behind lock and key. Strong measures can be ordered by the court to protect the witnesses' identities.
Yeah, this all sounds very familiar. Witness protection and taking care that witnesses aren't seen or filmed unless they really want to is something that we see from tribunals now. We see it at the ICC, but we also see it at the Kosovo court, which is almost exclusively protected witnesses.
Yeah, that is definitely something that echoes down to today. But I'm just going to play you something now that I don't think echoes down at all. I could not possibly imagine this happening today. It's really not usual.
This is the second courtroom of the tribunal. It's not in session today. Actually, I found it by accident because I was on my way to the Witness Protection Unit, and you walk through here on your way from the lifts down there. Now I'm here, though, I'm going to sit where the accused normally sits, which is here, and try to imagine what it would be like in session. In front of me, to my left, are the three big leather black chairs where the judges sit. There's the UN flag just behind them. My defence counsel would be just in front of me, and opposite them, the prosecution. And then there's the witness stand over to my right, where the witnesses would be. I'm sitting on a bench in front of the witnesses. It's not terribly comfortable, but I'm sure it's okay. There are microphones for the people who are talking. It's not an incredibly large space. I think it would be quite difficult to avoid eye contact here.
Yeah, that sounds unbelievable that you can just stumble on an empty courtroom and sit in all these places. I don't think I've ever had that. I've only seen it from behind the glass. Even on the kind of open days of tours of courtroom, they don't let you kind of sit in the judge's chair or the witness chair. But I would actually love to sit where witnesses sit where somebody gives testimony at the ICC, just to have an idea of what it looks like to them, because they are put somewhere where you can't see them if you are a journalist. And so it's really hard for me to grasp how it would be for somebody to testify there. So I think it would really add something. So here's my plug, I guess, to any ICC personnel listening, to let me sit in the chair once just to get an idea. Yeah,
I think for me, the biggest memory I have is on how essentially small a room it was. So everybody could really see everybody else, even though a witness might be protected from the public gallery. Their closeness to the accused was so clear when you actually are physically inside that courtroom. And I thought that also very important to try to reflect when I was making that programme 30 years ago about what kind of direct testimony was being heard in the courtrooms. And you know, like me, Stephanie, how hard that is to try to reflect in our journalism. Even when we have access to it, we don't always hear directly what people have to say. And when we do, then trying to show how extraordinary and difficult and tough the stories are. We can't interview the witnesses ourselves, so we can't hear their stories ourselves. So to get around that, I'd asked Françoise if she could remember any particular testimony that struck her, and this is what she told me about. It's about a particular witness who could not manage to carry her baby anymore and gave it to some men who said that they would look after it, and then what happened to her baby.
I was there. I followed everything. This is a personal feeling. I felt useless. I felt I wasn't being able to do something which will give them comfort. But I told myself, don't be discouraged before I tried. I said I was going to try. Because it was too much. People, they were saying they preferred to have died at that time. One of those stories which stuck me, it was a defense lawyer. He was trying to tell her, one time you said you have a baby on your back when you are trying to run away. Another time you said you don't have a baby. What happens? Where has gone the baby? And she just told us, she told the audience, the baby, I met somebody who was a Hutu, who said he has got a cow, who has got, he has milk. He's going to treat my baby like others, his kids. And I left, it was one child of 1 year's child. And he said, I'm going to live with the other children. And then, because she was tired, she has been raped, she couldn't run any longer with the baby. It was very heavy. The baby was very heavy. And then the baby was left with that man. And then when the defense lawyer asked her what happened to that baby, at the end he said, yes, I understand, he was given to dogs. I think there was something like 3 minutes of silence. Nobody could ask any more questions. And she was there. And she was there ready to answer all the questions. And you couldn't believe when you go to follow those testimony, every time you go, it seems you are, even though you have been going through many readings, many testimony, everything seems to be new. This is the kind of feeling I have. Everything seems to be new. Every time you ask why. Why? Is it possible? And next time, the same thing will be repeated. You will ask yourself, why? Is it possible?
Do you think the tribunal can give that answer? Why?
Even the accused cannot give the answer. This is my feeling. If they were asked now, some of them, I'm sure they want to say why. They won't understand. This is my opinion.
I think this is a problem really of having a tribunal. We always want kind of the truth and we want to find out why things happened. But a tribunal is really not able to answer that. It's only able to answer, and it's set up to answer the question of guilt or innocence, and not all the kind of questions about how it was possible that it happened. And we see the same thing. People want this tribunal and people think that it will give the whole truth or the exact story, and people want to know why things happen. I think it's a kind of defense mechanism, because if you know why things happen, you can maybe recognize it when it happens to you. But of course, the world really doesn't work like that.
Another of the issues that I wanted to cover in that documentary 30 years ago was the big question that was going around: where are the accused going to serve their sentences? Because there hadn't been any agreements with anyone. I know this is going to sound a bit quaint and odd now, because now we're so used to people being transported somewhere out of either The Hague or, in that case, Arusha, and serving their sentence somewhere else, but we just didn't know. So you'll hear me chatting to the then registrar.
At the end of the day, the accused are ferried back in armoured cars to the detention block, part of Arusha prison. But one problem the tribunal will have to face as it grows more successful is where those convicted will spend their sentences. Registrar Okali is already working on it.
One thing I can tell you is that we are not supposed to keep them here. The system created under the statute says that countries should offer to assist us with this issue.
Well, at the moment, Rwanda has offered, but are you going to send people to Rwanda to go to jail?
I don't think there is any sentiment towards that in the tribunal, but I think that people who have talked to me have expressed a different view. So we are exploring, in fact, with other countries, and we are particularly concentrating in Africa, because we believe that for sociocultural reasons and also for reasons of the deterrent effect that we are talking about, that it is best that these sentences be served in Africa.
I can't imagine anyone volunteering to jail someone accused of genocide, so I think you're going to have a hard task.
Well, yes, but the countries I've approached and talked to, I've presented it to them as an African problem. And I must say they have responded, when put that way, they have responded very well, because they now feel that it's a challenge to African countries to make this kind of contribution.
And of course, now we know that in the end, Mali and Benin both stepped up and, with UN support, built some special prisons. And the majority of the people who are convicted by the Rwanda Tribunal have served out or are continuing to serve out their sentences there.
Yeah, but we still have the trouble with countries not accepting or not knowing where they're going, because you had people who were found not guilty, or people have served already their sentence in the Rwanda Tribunal, and there are questions about who will take him. Here in The Hague, we have Félicien Kabuga, and the alleged financier of the genocide, who's a very elderly man and who has dementia, and so he can't be put on trial. But now the question is, where will he go? Because he's still in The Hague detention unit, because no country will really seems to be wanting to take him. And there's no real procedure on what to do with this man who's too old and frail to be put on trial, but nobody really wants.
And then also for the last couple of years, we've had the issue of a handful of former detainees from the ICTR who've gone to a house in Niger, where they are now without funds, I understand, without passports, I understand, and no prospects to go anywhere else, and are basically gradually dying. Of course, we did a pod on that. Maybe not much has changed. Have you heard anything new on that, Stephanie?
I think the last thing that I heard was that there was one of the people who were staying in that house in Niger died while he was waiting for a solution. But as I understand it, they're still there getting only kind of a minimum of support and help to get out of there. And it doesn't seem to be urgent for anyone, except for these men there and their family and their lawyers.
So I know it's a bit of a hop, skip and a jump around all these different things, but maybe we can just conclude a bit on the ICTR with another question, which is how Rwanda and Rwandans kind of see the tribunal now. I mean, it closed down in 2016, almost 10 years ago now. But way back in the day, the relationship with Rwanda was a tough one. Kigali, as I said, was not happy with how long the processes were taken, by the ways that witnesses were treated. And as journalists, that was an issue that we had to keep on examining because witnesses could make or break a trial. But to get the perspective for now, I got in touch with Philibert Gakwanzire. He's the president of the board of Ibuka, which is the Genocide Survivors Association, and he is a genocide scholar himself at the University of Rwanda. We had a really nice discussion, but a terrible line because he was in Paris and we couldn't connect up properly. So I'm only going to play rather a short extract of what I think is the most important thing that he said to me. And it was basically that for Rwandans, the most important thing that the tribunal, with all of its faults, we went through an awful lot of the faults, that really it represents that the international community via this judicial official body actually clearly stated that the genocide happened, that it was planned, that the state was involved, that political parties were involved, that the military was part of it, that all this was decided and defined by an international court in Arusha, Tanzania. And on that basis, kind of denial of the genocide is really not possible. So here's Philibert.
What we retained as Rwandans and Ibuka and the survivors community in general is that putting in place this international tribunal, they were an acknowledgement of the genocide and across the world states. And we can remember also that this tribunal made very historical decisions when they were a decision that nobody can deny in the ICTR, the commission of the genocide, that genocide has been committed. So I think it is from this way that even high-level organizers of the genocide has been convicted in Arusha, from politicians like Prime Minister, the architect of emerging political party like the president, the vice president, ministers, etc., even the administrators at burgomasters, the prefects, etc., including military officers, the chief of staff, the minister of defense, etc. So this is a very important and historical basis that what happened in Rwanda was a genocide planned. You remember, for example, some of the deniers saying that the genocides are not planned. But this is a farce because, you know, there is the historical understanding, but also there is a judicial methodology and the decisions being made according to facts and evidences. You should not find evidence in terms of trial, but historically speaking, the genocide against the Tutsi has been planned. The reason why the biggest architects of this genocide has been committed.
There's a deep dive from me with a few of the people and a few of the issues that the ICTR throws up or threw up for me there and now throws up again for us now, nearly 30 years later. Any final remarks from you, Steph? Do you think you're going to be doing the same thing about the ICTY in a few years' time?
I think, well, probably, yeah. I had a kind of throwback to the ICTY today because I'm struck by the comment of Philibert that it is so important that the ICTR established that a genocide was committed. And today we got, I saw there was a message from the MICT, so the residual mechanism dealing with the ICTY, saying that General Krstić, who was the first Bosnian Serb convicted on genocide charges by the ICTY, by the Yugoslav tribunal, is asking for early release. And he has amended a statement of remorse and a recognition for what he has done, which he hasn't done before. And it threw me back to that is such an important aspect. The only time I saw a friend of mine, a fellow journalist who was a journalist from from Bosnia, but who had also been a victim of Srebrenica, really get emotional was when somebody in the court, when there were two officers who pled guilty and admitted guilt. And so, yes, this kind of narrowing of the denial space is hugely important. And that really made me think of that. And Philibert's comment made me think of that. So with all our complaints about how much it costs and how little they do and how long these trial takes, there is this very important bit that it does do, and that helps victims and survivors hold on, and why all this effort is put into it. So I think that's really important to note.
Well, let's just wrap up with a final thank you to some of our new supporters on Patreon.
Yeah, thank you so much for supporting our work. We are very happy for every penny or cent. And we want to welcome some new subscribers that we've seen this period. We have Matt Sands.
We have Sophie Ibischer.
We have Mina Vidakovic. Thank you very much, Mina, an old ICTY face for me.
And Melissa Chen.
And last but certainly not least, Suzanne Varrell. Thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon.
Thanks very much, Steph. See you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.